Welcome back in Solitude with myself, DJ Hero. In this video, I want to talk about audio plugins, and more specifically, what you do and don't need. First off, how about a quick definition? What's an audio plugin? Certainly all of us know this by now, but an audio plugin is software that can add or enhance audio-related functionality in our digital audio workstation. Way back before all this fancy computer software, there was only hardware. And before that, people had to get creative to manipulate the audio. For example, if you wanted to sound like you were singing in a stadium, you had to go to a stadium and record yourself singing. Then, in 1957, the EMT 140 was invented. It was the first hardware reverb. Before you know it, there were hundreds of different hardware reverb emulators, each one evolving to be a bit more advanced than the one before it. At first, they were all analog, then the digital realm came, until finally they were 100% software-based on things like algorithms or convolution mathematics. Today, there are literally hundreds of different reverb plugins. That's just reverb. In my average track, I use an EQ, a compressor, reverb, delay, some sort of filter, a flanger, a limiter, maybe some distortion, definitely saturation, a metering plugin, and half a dozen various effects. Let's call that roughly 11 different types of plugins at least. Now, if there are hundreds of different reverb plugins, it's safe to say the same applies for every kind of plugin, and that doesn't include the actual synthesizers. Long story short, there are thousands of options out there. Not only are there a ton of different companies, but the companies themselves usually have dozens of variations and options available to you. So what's my point? Stop wasting your time and money constantly buying new plugins, and definitely stop downloading hacked versions of those plugins. Here's why. Number one, today's DAWs come with some really brilliant stock plugins. I use quite a bit of Ableton's plugins. When I used Pro Tools and FL Studio back in the day, I used quite a few of their stock plugins as well. Number two, third-party plugins cost money. You can definitely find some free ones, but some of them can get pretty costly. In my opinion, I'd rather spend that money on better monitor speakers and making my room sound better so that I get the best representation of the plugins I already have. If you've got the best plugin on the planet, but you can't hear it properly, it's never going to be good enough. The quality difference, number three, between the various different plugins is actually quite small. Certainly, there is some difference between the lesser expensive plugins and some of the more grandiose plugins, but many times, the more expensive plugins just have more bells and whistles built in. Some of those additional functions can be achieved with just a couple of extra steps within your DAW using the stock plugins. For example, the FabFilter Pro R Reverb has a built-in EQ that can color the sound both before and after the actual reverb portion of the effect. The Pro R is maybe the only FabFilter plugin I don't really love. I find I get better reverb sound quality with the Ableton Reverb using a separate EQ to color it the way I want it to sound. Number four, more often than not, if you're not getting the sound you think you should be getting from a plugin, it may not be the plugin at all. Instead, it could be what we call an information gap. You might be better off studying the plugins you already have to better understand them, to fill in the information you don't have. Figure out what their parameters actually do, how to control them, how they affect the sound that you're playing with. Once you fully understand the plugins, 9 times out of 10, you will achieve what you want with it, I promise. Buying a different plugin only adds more time to that learning curve, taking more time away from making music, and potentially adding more frustration because you're still not getting the sound that you want. Number 5, something I call decision fatigue. What I mean is, let's say you're working on a vocal and you think it needs some compression. If you have a million different compressors, you have to stop Ask yourself, what plugins do I have that are best for compressing vocals? Then maybe A/B a couple of different plugins to figure out which one is best for the job. Next thing you know, you've spent an hour simply trying to decide what plugin to use instead of actually applying the compression to your vocal. Making music is already complicated enough. Don't make it more complicated with unnecessary decisions. Here's what I recommend before you get in over your head and dive deep down that rabbit hole of collecting audio plugins. Number 1, honestly learn all of the stock plugins that came with your DAW. Try them, watch tutorials, put the stock plugins to good use. Hear what they sound like. What I'm saying is really get an understanding of those stock plugins. Number 2, once you've mastered the plugins that came with your DAW, ask yourself, what functionality am I missing? Are there certain features that you want? Or does achieving a specific goal take too many steps with the stock plugins? Number 3, once you've compiled that list, ask yourself, what plugins don't you actually like? Maybe you don't like them because they don't sound the way you want them to. Maybe, like I said, accomplishing your goal takes too many different plugins in a chain, and that just gets tedious. Whatever the reason is, figure out the plugins you don't like. Number 4, now that you've got a list of the plugins you do and don't like that came with your DAW, it's time to turn towards those third-party plugins. Having a list of what you want will help you stay on course, preventing you from downloading or buying stuff you don't need. Additionally, it will help you narrow down the choices to the ones that have the features that you want. That right there is going to dramatically shorten your list of plugins to buy. Number 5, next up, open your search engine. Search for best whatever plugin. If you search best EQ plugins, I promise you'll get a list of results longer than you can imagine. Start reading. Learn what they have to say. Read the reviews, watch some videos, narrow down the choices a bit. Once you've got a small selection, download their demos. Try them out. Give them a shot. See what they sound like. Check them against the stock plugins to see the differences and the contrasts, see their similarities. The bottom line is you don't need a dozen different plugins that all do the same job. You need one that you understand and does the job the way you want it to do. You want to be able to keep your focus on being creative and producing music. Obviously, as you grow, your needs and your tastes will change. I'm not saying you shouldn't revisit the plugins that you have and compare them to what else might be out there, especially if some new things come out, right? New technology, new software. But simply acquiring plugins to have more plugins is a waste of time and a potential waste of money. When I started producing back in the day, I began with FL Studio. Several years after that, I switched to Pro Tools before changing to Ableton, where I'm at today. Through all of that time, I've used Cakewalk, Reason, Logic, GarageBand, SoundForge, Sonic Foundry's Acid, and Cubase, working with other artists or collaborating or just trying things out. I've had a taste of probably all of them, almost all of them for sure. As I decided I needed third-party plugins, I blindly started acquiring them, one after another. I'm willing to bet that there was a time I had a dozen different EQs that all did the same thing. Everything from solid-state Logic to Waves to every freebie and hack in between. I'll be honest with you, I probably used them just to say I used XYZ brand name with my friends or to producers that I was hoping to impress. As I matured as a human and evolved and progressed as a producer, I realized that I wanted to obtain specific results and that certain plugins did that better than other plugins. As you're well aware by now, I'm a huge fan of the FabFilter product suite. For the most part, their entire line gives me the results that I like. That doesn't mean you should go out there and buy them all right now. You should use the plugins that give you the best results for your production. And I bet for most, the stock plugins that came with your DAW will do that. But you may like the reverb from one company and an EQ from another company, a limiter from a third, and stick to stock plugins for everything else. You don't have to be brand compliant, obviously. You simply need to have what works for your studio and your production. If you're in the market for third-party plugins, here's an incomplete list of some of the companies you can turn to. There are some really fantastic effects on this list, many of which I can vouch for from experience. I've used quite a few of them over the years. You can search and read through the entire list on splice.com. Here is a link to that full list that just scrolled up the screen. It's a great resource to see what effects the companies make and read about the features on them. Also, Splice is a great resource to download free plugins and to rent to own others, so check them out. Again, not sponsored by Splice, but I certainly do endorse their product. It's a great product. It's a great site that has a lot of resources. If I have to make some recommendations, I would recommend sticking with the well-known brands and larger companies that have a history because of the fact that their customer service is probably going to be better. Their downloaders and their websites are more likely going to be better and more trustworthy. I've been to some of the smaller sites and they can be filled with a bunch of pop-ups and marketing ads for other random things. I don't know about you, but I didn't spend a lot of money building the best computer I could to risk it being infected with malware and spyware from random websites. Additionally, the more reputable, larger companies, they're going to have more stable products. Less crashing is always better, especially if that load, that CPU load, starts to increase the more and more you work with the products and start adding them to chains and automating parameters, things like that. Obviously, I'm a huge fan of the FabFilter suite. I've used several Waves plugins. Their PAZ frequency analyzer is my go-to for metering. I love their L2 limiter. It's a great, simple little plugin. Doesn't take a whole lot of CPU. By far, one of my favorite limiters that I've found over the years. I have and use many of their hybrid line as well. Their hybrid delay I use in every track I produce. I've used many of the solid-state logic, the SSL plugins. The company boasts they sound exactly like the hardware they make. I can't speak to that specifically. I've not used the hardware, but I do like the results I've gotten from their compressors, though not so much on their channel EQs. However, that's probably because I prefer to have more control in my EQ. I've heard some fantastic results from the iZotope products. However, I'm not really a huge fan of their mastering suite. I think it adds a little unnatural sound to the final product. I've spoken with several big name producers that love the Lexicon Reverb plugins, but they can be costly. If you're on a budget, I highly recommend the Valhalla Reverb suite. They have a very good quality at a much lower cost. While I love the D16 group for their synthesizers, specifically the Phocyon and the Lush 101, I have tried out some of their effects, and I can't say I was a huge fan. But don't let my opinion of them dissuade you from checking them out. Definitely check out D16. They make great products. I do want to touch on synthesizers briefly. This is a subject for debate today because hardware, specifically modular synthesis, is having a bit of a resurgence. I don't want to start an argument. If you love hardware, do it. Get all the cool hardware you want. I will drool over it with you. However, if you are all software-based, there are some heavy hitters and many small companies. I would recommend sticking with the larger brand names for two simple reasons. If you want to achieve a specific sound that you've heard from another artist, a bigger name, more than likely they did it with one of the new, cool, hot, big synthesizers, whatever's popular, right? Your Massives, your Serums, your Silents, etc. And then secondly, you will find more tutorials online for the bigger brands than those smaller synths out there. Having access to video tutorials will help you better understand the synth itself. It will help you create better sounds and help you create better sounds more quickly. Having a complete in-depth knowledge of your tools will allow you to focus more on making music instead of fiddling with knobs, trying desperately to find something you like. To bring it all together, Number one, really get to know the plugins that came with your DAW. There's some really great stuff in there. Number two, if you want third-party plugins, know what you want before you start spending money. Understanding what you need from a plugin will help you narrow down that selection dramatically. Number three, avoid getting plugins for the sake of having more plugins. Less is more, folks. Don't waste time trying to choose what plugin you want when that time could be used actually producing music. Number four, get a thorough understanding of the plugins you have before you look to get more. Often, the plugins you have will do exactly what you want them to do. You simply need to gain a more complete understanding of how to use it. Making music is complicated, and as the technology evolves, we get more and more choices, we're given more and more options, making the process more and more complicated. And that's a good thing. But we're not into making music to keep buying new tools and to keep all the companies that make those tools in business. Obviously, we want to support them by paying for the tools that we want, but we make music because we enjoy making music. The better we learn what we've got will help us make more efficient choices, and that will help us keep focused on making music and getting the results that we want. If you have additional questions or have any ideas for future videos, please leave a comment below. I've had a lot of folks hit me up on Facebook Messenger lately. I'm glad you're reaching out. I love to hear from you, but if you could leave a quick comment here as well, it helps the channel out for sure. Make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe, and hit that notification button. And if you want more from me, search Originaldjhero, all one word, on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, SoundCloud, and Mixcloud, or search DJ Hero on Beatport, Spotify, iTunes, and Google Play. And until next time, good luck in your own production, and make sure you're having fun.